We want our people to feel like their job is just a part of their lives, not their entire lives. And so a lot of how we communicate with our candidates is in line with that.
Welcome to Between the Briefs, a podcast by Steno. We share practical tips and expert insights on the pre-trial process, court reporting, and legal technology to keep you updated on how technology is revolutionizing the litigation process and the wider legal sector. I'm your host, Adrian.
Hello and welcome to Between the Briefs, brought to you by Steno. I'm your host, Adrian, and we have our co-host here,
Joe Stevens.
And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Alex Shahrestani, the managing partner of Promise Legal. Alex is a legal tech visionary, software developer, and attorney with a unique blend of expertise in both the legal and technology sectors. As a founder of Lawtomation and an advocate for using AI in innovation solutions in law, Alex is at the forefront of transforming how legal services are provided to tech startups and other clients. At Promise Legal, Alex leads with a creative and passionate approach, providing tailored legal services to today's most innovative companies. In this episode, we'll explore his journey, how he integrates AI and technology into legal practices, and the exciting future of legal tech. Alex, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Adrian. Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. I'm really excited to have you on this podcast. Now, I just want to get right into it. Tell me, you have a very unique career blending both technology and law. Can you tell me what first sparked that interest?
So I actually started my undergraduate journey in 2006, which, as you know, was right before that big financial crisis of 2008, where I had to drop out for financial reasons. And, it was a rough time for a lot of people. But when I was going through that, I had already sort of decided on the law, but I was like, how do I future-proof myself? Like, I don't want to be in this position ever again. And so I sort of came down to this idea that, environmental law and technology law are going to be the future, right? And so I sort of picked up a degree in computer science to try and provide myself with the skills necessary to thrive for the next 20 or 30 years. That was also sort of in service of this vision to run my own firm. So before I ever applied to law school or anything, I had this passion for starting my own practice. Both my parents are entrepreneurs, so it sort of was like a natural fit for me. And when I went through this process of learning computer programming, I thought it would help me be the attorney who understood the technology, but I just loved it so much, I never really let go of the practice. So I've been coding ever since.
That's incredible, man. And I love to hear that. And then is that how you came to develop Promise Legal?
Yeah, I mean, so it was all part of this bigger vision. So it started off with, coming to UT Austin. So I had lived my whole life in California, wanted to experience somewhere else. I felt like law school was kind of that last hurrah where I can go get a taste for some other place without it being a shorter kind of trip. And my criteria were a tech presence, like a tech startup presence, and then a big music scene. And so Austin fit the bill. I ended up coming to Austin. I've been here ever since. But when I got to the law school, I remember being really shocked that there weren't any more technology resources there. So sort of being the can-do kind of guy that I am, I put together the Journal of Law and Technology at Texas. So that's still thriving. I still, meet new members all the time. But all of this has been sort of centered around this idea that the practice of law is going to be about attorneys running software, right? So instead of having this sort of pyramid shape where there's a partner up at the top and then paralegals and associates and whatnot, I sort of imagine some of those roles being replaced by technology. And so, my whole journey has been around like, how do I make that happen? So when I first started my practice in 2018, right after I passed the bar, um, it was a rough start. Like, don't get me wrong, like starting a practice right out of school is rough. But every step of the way has been, how do I turn this into a process? How do I bring technology to bear so that way next time I have to face this issue in my practice, I have a much better way of doing so. And so that sort of went for a couple of years and things went well. And then the State Bar of Texas changed the ethical rules to permit trade names. And I always felt like Shahrestani law, while I'm proud of my name and all of that stuff. It just didn't really capture what I was looking to do. And so we rebranded in 2022 on the first day we were allowed to have trade names in Texas to Promise Legal, and we've been operating as such ever since.
That concept that you just discussed, like the replacement of jobs, um, it seems to me to be way down the sliding scale of things that lawyers are comfortable talking about. So, for example, you'd have a practitioner now who's really comfortable and probably embracing to varying degrees like the benefits of technology and how can it better their practice. But when you take it to the level of this can actually be replacing humans, I think that gins up a ton of fear right now. So, how are you so confident in that space right now, and how do you have your what mindset do you have to sort of embrace the fact that it's going to be that powerful?
Yeah, so there's fear, and then the other common one is a lot of skepticism. Like those are the two like strongest knee-jerk reactions I see. But l- I'm gonna like step back a little bit from the technology question to sort of give you my perspective on this level of reaction in the legal space. So when I went to UT, it's a nicer school. It's one of those schools where they're sort of trying to create a pipeline of people to go straight into big law, straight into like prestigious clerkships. They want you to take a particular pathway, and so I felt like my experience during law school was a lot of me curating my own experience. Right, like I was the guy who wanted to start a practice, which they were not equipped to help me do, right? And so, I remember asking all kinds of attorneys, like, pretty much I'd meet someone who I'd hit it off with, and I would say, "What do you think of this plan?" And, 7 or 8 times out of 10, people would be like, "You can't do that." And the reason that was sort of behind it was like, well, you need to get experience somewhere else first and, so on and so forth. But what I came to like notice about these folks who were giving me this advice, it always mirrored exactly what they did. So it was like, I went and started at Big Law, therefore you should go and start at Big Law. Or like, I started in government practice, you should start in government practice. Like it was like a reflection of what their experience was, which, more power to them, but it's not necessarily a reflection of like any greater knowledge, right? And so that was sort of eye-opening for me during law school. And then my sort of trajectory as an attorney going through, you know, pretty much looking to find my people, right? Who are the techie attorneys out there, right? And like it's a small but growing number of us, but as you go through that journey of looking for folks like that, you come across a lot of this fear, this skepticism, like every new technology, every new tool is overblown according to attorneys. Um, and I think a lot of that is really just experience and like, lack of knowledge about what is possible. So all of that to sort of say, like, if you find yourself being one of the people who's pushing back against this being realistic or even like a near or midterm possibility, I challenge you to question that and think about why that might be. But for me, I'm not pessimistic about what this means for being an attorney. I think there's still plenty of opportunity to be an attorney. My gut instinct on this is that we're not going to run out of jobs for attorneys. We're not going to have lack of opportunity. It's just the pillar shape is going to flatten out. It's going to be, the larger law firms where there's this really steep climb up to the top. I don't think is going to be viable in the long term. You're going to see a lot of those firms, perhaps splinter into smaller, agile groups. And that's sort of the vision I have of the future is like these tools are not going to be a replacement for human judgment and human experience. And you're going to need someone to do quality assurance, which is, what like 9/10 of being a brand is in the first place. So I see this as really an opportunity to serve more people and perhaps like the pricing, there's going to be like some shakeups, but I think ultimately we're going to find that the number of attorneys we have in the country is not more than we're going to need as we go through this technological upheaval.
If we stay in that space for a second, Alex, because you just talked about something I was curious about too, pricing. When you have a tool that does something so much more efficiently, AI, or quickly, what does this do to the billable hour?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been big on the billable hour. There's going to be some things that you need to do the billable hour for, like a negotiation, perhaps a litigation, like large pieces of your job are going to be dictated by what an opposing party does, and it's not really fair to expect someone to, take on the whole world, for a fixed fee. So I sort of recognize the need for the billable hour, and I think the billable hour itself will still have a place in this future, but I think moving away from the billable hour is actually, I mean, it's something that clients ask for, but I actually think there's like a huge upside to it, especially as we go through these technological shifts. Like if you tie your revenue to the billable hour, you are always going to cap how much money you can earn, and you're going to have to squeeze out more time out of your day all the time in order to ever increase your income. If you embrace fixed fees or alternative fee arrangements, then every time you get more efficient at your job, that's actually a pay increase, right? Like if it takes you 3 hours to do a project that you bill out for $1,000, let's say, and then you start being able to accomplish that job in 1 hour, it's like you've 3x'd your billable hour per se, right? Like so I think detaching from the billable hour and perhaps looking at a value added model or, you know, I mean, even maybe a commodity type model, commodity has like a connotation to it that I don't intend here. But, if you look at those models, I think it benefits attorneys as they learn how to scale and grow their operation without needing you to, give up on other priorities in your life.
A great point of view, especially as we see law firms scaling into this new age of taking on clients and how it's going to look like with technology. Now, I'm curious, seeing as how you're embracing technology into your law firm, do you have a current process for what makes a good piece of legal tech that you want to embed? Is there a process that you like to follow that goes, okay, this meets all our criteria, let's bring it on and onboard it correctly?
Absolutely. It's pretty much a factors test, not not a elements test, right? Like it's you sort of weigh the various options out there, but there are certain criteria that I always look for, and they, weigh more or less equally across them, but the presence or lack of one is not necessarily determinative. So there's, I think, a few sort of gut checks and like rules of thumb that people who aren't technical can kind of follow to ensure that they're doing the right things with their tech. So the first thing is don't get like shiny object syndrome. It's super easy, like especially with the advent of AI. There's products are flying onto the shelves, right? Like it's suddenly very accessible for beginner programmers to go and like build a fully developed product because of the assistance of AI. And so you're going to be seeing, an influx of new technology, new opportunities that people are offering to you, and they're not always going to be actually worthwhile. So my approach is to look at the things that actually take the most amount of time. So like I said, we do fixed fee as often as possible, but we still track our time, and it's not a per project basis. We actually have a tracker that keeps track of what you're working on at any given time. And this is not about like looking over the shoulder of the people we work with or anything like that. It's about identifying where the bottlenecks are. So the first biggest bottleneck we ever identified was the time spent on email. So like we're working on a matter for a client and it might not take that much time, but like the communications themselves, while simple and straightforward, and you think of it as like an easy thing to do, end up taking a huge amount of time. So over the course of a week, 50% of the time we spent on client matters was drafting and responding to email. You were like, okay, we gotta automate this, right? Like this, it seems like there's got to be some room for improvement. And so we put together, this was a while back, so it was a simple automation, a template system where if there was a particular type of email we sent a lot of, we created a little button in our email platform where you click the button and it drops in the information that you need and you send it. And we were able to get with that automation, not even AI or like automated like self-determined processes. We got our email time down to 25% of our time. So that's like a big win, right? Identifying where those bottlenecks are is what should drive what you do with legal tech. And then the next thing that you want to do is identify how closed off the system is, right? So you might pick up a particular practice software, or maybe you're doing a wealth counsel, I think is the big one, in estate planning. Like there's a number of software tools out there, and like they may or may not hit your needs, but what you need to look for is how easy it is to export your data. So if you're able to export everything as a spreadsheet, that's a big win. Like that's almost actually a determinative one, right? Like, are you able to get your data out? So exporting to a spreadsheet is the simplest one, or access to an API can be a viable alternative. And what an API is, for people who don't know, it's a way to interact with software without actually having to open the software. So you click a button in Gmail and something happens in Practice Panther, right? Like that's an API. And typically APIs involve the export of your data. So APIs or spreadsheets are a good thing to look out for when you're picking up a legal tech tool, because you never know if the tool's going to get bought out. You never know if the tool's going to fail, whatever. And you're going to want a way to like continue your systems and not have to start from scratch. So what I do with all of my tools is I pull everything into a spreadsheet, and I find a way for it to live within a spreadsheet in Google Drive. So that way I can have the data interact with each other in the spreadsheet, as opposed to um, doing anything with their built-in integrations. And the reason for that is because of tech debt. Tech debt is when you basically lock yourself into a system because the cost of changing the system is too time-consuming, too expensive, whatever. And so if you're able to pull all that data out and work with it elsewhere, your tech debt stays minimal.
I never thought about that. That is like such an interesting topic. Like being able to not be so sticky to a software because you control more of your own data is very important.
Alex, so everything that you just talked about sounds like it's on the administrative side. In other words, the bottlenecks that you're talking about, or how can I be more efficient with my client communication, um, automating different processes. Uh, so I guess where I'm going with this is, are you doing that so that it frees you up to take more on? Or does it free you up to do the legal work in a way that you feel is what your sort of highest and best use of your legal degree is?
I mean, both and. So there are certain matters that I actually really enjoy taking on, like the high tech stuff. The question of what happens in a situation where some new technology is brought to bear on a situation. So like for example, copyrights in AI. Like I love that issue. So when stuff like that walks in the door, I am thrilled to put my mind to it and research it and figure out like what the outcome is going to look like for my clients. There's a lot of practice in the law that is more, I mean, formulaic to an extent, right? Like everyone who's an attorney listening knows what I'm talking about. There's like a formula, like you still need to like give it some attention. Like there's going to be some nuances and exceptions and all of that stuff. That type of work is another thing that I think is a really good candidate for automation. So we have a number of automations there as well. Um, so just sort of speaking to that admin sort of time savings. But yeah, for me, it's about being able to take on the work and handle it quickly. So I don't know if you've ever experienced the phenomenon, Joe, of bringing on a new client and being like, man, I'm already so busy. And like, you're not going to turn it away. Like it might be a good case or whatever. And it's sort of like, it gets in the way of you being able to go and develop business, and it can like get in the way of you being able to competently provide your services, right? So there's like an almost emotional benefit to having these systems in place, like things that are handled on a set of rails are things that I don't have to think about, and that frees me up to either work on legal stuff or develop more automations or bring on more clients or spend time with my family, right? Like it's a little bit of, it's both and, right? Like it provides extra space for what needs more space.
To a skeptic out there, to someone who is not embracing the technology, or maybe doesn't even sort of know what questions to ask. If you had to sort of like bullet point one or two really specific challenges to that person to sort of disrupt their practice or that you see have brought a lot of benefit to yours, what would those challenges be?
If someone is like a full-on skeptic and perhaps isn't well versed in thinking through these problems, there's one particular question that I think will help them identify what's possible. Um, so we do a lot of privacy law for our clients, and a lot of that involves understanding what data you have and how it's traveling through the practice, or for the customer, it's like, or for the client, it's their system or their process, whatever. That's actually really hard to do. Like, if it's not something you've done a lot of, it's really hard to actually sit down and think like, well, it goes through all these like dozens of actual different pieces versus what you think intuitively, like, oh, well, my assistant answers the phone, I get the file, and then, maybe opposing counsel or something has it. But really, it starts off with like a telephone company that goes to your assistant who enters the data into your OneDrive system. And then that gets passed on to a CRM. And like, there's all these little pieces that we sort of take for granted as like, well, someone owns the project, so therefore the data is just there. Really, it's actually going through this long trail of things. And each of those points along the way is a potential place to cut some fat. So thinking through where your data is going, I think will set off some light bulbs for listeners. Another one would be just think about the things you hate to do. Like, what was the most recent thing where you went home and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I had to do that." Right? Like, almost certainly there's a way to, if not fully automate it, like you can at least take some of the pain out of that particular piece of your practice. So that's the other thing I would do, is just think about the one thing you would love to get off your plate, but perhaps don't have the money to hire someone for.
Great point of view. And I'm curious, this is great from anyone listening that wants to do an introspection into their processes and then see where, technology could really improve. How about for someone that already knows that there is a problem, let's say a paralegal going through a workflow in a firm, and realizes that it could be optimized, but as we know, law firms can be a little bit slow to adapt new technologies. So, what is the best way this person could propose this so that it can actually be implemented?
Man, that is a tough question because attorneys are risk averse by nature. Like, it is a problem that I think we need to deal with kind of culturally, like as attorneys. So during law school, Joe, you said you went to UT as well. Is that right? Do you remember Texas Law Fellowships? Okay, so I was president of Texas Law Fellowships during one of my years there, and you know the goal. And for people who don't know, it's basically an independent nonprofit that raised funds during law school to fund students who were doing pro bono or government positions that were unpaid over the summer. So the whole organization existed to raise money and then distribute it to people. And so when I was president, I was like, okay, how do we generate more money, right? Like, that's the only question to answer, right? And I had two big ideas, or one big idea and one really simple idea. The first big idea was, okay, like there's tailgates that happen all over campus. Let's do a tailgate fundraiser. People can pay a couple of bucks for a ticket. Everyone goes to the game together, and the nonprofit gets to make a little bit more money. That got a lot of pushback, just because it's a bunch of law students, aspiring attorneys, who are like, "Oh my gosh, we can't do this," and then you go and investigate it, and it turns out you actually can do it without a whole lot of problems. And then the second one, which is really where I'm gonna like sort of hammer on attorneys here, was it was literally, why don't we reach out to the places where these students are going to work and see if they can drum up some support to donate money for these students who are going to work here. And I remember I got some like serious pushback from students in the room, and like I had asked this question, like, is this okay if we do, from the perspective of, is this going to harm a student's job prospects to like reach out to their employer and be like, hey, would you be willing to kick in money or do a social media blast or whatever? And no one thought that. They were just like, "You just can't." And it's like, "Wait, no, what do you mean you just can't?" And that has like really stuck with me my whole practice, because like that is the knee-jerk reaction of attorneys, is the answer is no. And so I don't have a better thing to say to the paralegal who's trying to convince their boss, but I mean, like, I will say this until my dying breath, like, you need to get on board now. Like, like, one of the things that I like to communicate to people, especially with AI, it's like most obvious with AI. If you want to be better and prepared for AI in the future, you need to start dabbling in it now. So the example I give is CGI. You all remember when CGI first came out, and like it was really cool, and like you could tell it was fake, but it looked real enough. And eventually it gets better and better. And there was like this, I think there was like a Final Fantasy movie that came out in like the early aughts or something like that, where it looked real. Like I remember being in like a Best Buy or something, seeing the ad for that and being like, wait, are those real people, or is that fake? Now, when I look back at it, it's so obviously fake, and nothing changed about the video. What changed was my ability to identify what made it look fake and not fake, right? It's a muscle you flex, and using AI tools, using tech tools in general is also a muscle you flex. And the longer you don't do it, the longer you're just out of it, right? Like you just need to do in order to identify what can be done.
You're talking about a population that's risk averse, as you said, and interacting, colliding in real time with a technological force that has not really upended the practice since, and we kind of go back to like the digitization of case law and Lexis and Westlaw. But this feels almost even broader and more exponential in a way. Um, do you think, I mean, as you apply it to your practice, do you think that there are things that you're doing right now that 6 months from now are just gonna be look completely fundamentally different?
I mean, it's a constant learning curve. You're asking about like the tools I'm using now, or are you asking about like what I think is going to be released in the near future?
It could be a combination of the 2, but also, like, do you think that way too? Do you think that you're engaging with this technology in a way that you're sort of mapping out a roadmap for the efficiency of your firm and the efficiency of your practice in, 6 months, a year-long segments? Or is it just really actually about diving in and embracing the uncertainty of this technology and seeing where it goes?
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, it's primarily diving in and learning and like catching fire on certain issues, right? Like once certain things will click for you and you'll feel like this is so exciting, I'm just going to work on this. It's something I enjoy, whatever. And you'll like pick up skills along the way that then allow you to actually plan ahead, right? So I now, because I am well versed enough in like the administration of a practice and some of these tech tools that I rely on heavily, that I'm able to identify like, okay, these are the possibilities, these are the things I know I can accomplish. Let me set a plan for 2025. So for example, 2025, I'm amping up my marketing, right? Like a lot more social media. My email I'm very protective of because we have like a high open rate, but I'm gonna start ramping that up a little bit more and taking a few more risks with that. And a few more things like for sort of supporting my team, right? Like on the legal stuff, right? Someone takes up a case or a matter that they're not familiar with, and like they want to do a good job on it. And like, yeah, of course they can always reach out to me or another attorney, but having tools at their disposal that make their job easier, like these are all things that I'm able to plan now because I dived in and I just started working with it, right? Like it's one follows the other.
One objection I always hear from attorneys is the idea of around privacy and data. They think adopting these legal technology and tools, although you said the more you use it, the more it's like a muscle, you become better at it, but they don't know how to use it without compromising everything that they're doing in terms of their clients.
It is a concern. I mean, let me say this, like I am a very privacy forward guy. In my life, I am all about like the privacy of my data, like not giving it away to somebody else. Um, and the issue is important, but simultaneously overblown, right? So what it is like a fundamental misunderstanding of how technology works. So I almost guarantee you the data that your listeners are afraid of giving to an AI system or a legal tech system, they have given away somewhere else, like in the way that they're worried about. Like maybe there's like one or two people who are like super on top of it who have not done that, but almost certainly everyone has given away some level of data. And the reason for that is because tech support is not possible without access to your data. I mean, if you have a document that gets deleted from your system and you go through all these steps to recover it, that's because there's access to it somewhere other than where you intended, right? Like that's the only possible way to retrieve that information. Um, I mean, really, the protections that are actually available to you are contractual. That is like the primary defense of your client's data that attorneys have, and that's privacy policies, terms of service, whatever they have promised you, like your data agreements, whatever. That is like the best level of protection most people have. Now, take for example, and like this is not to call out anybody in particular, like this is just like a ubiquitous example of a technology in the law that is familiar and like honestly not any worse than any other tool out there, but like a LexisNexis or a Westlaw, like they have access to your data for the purposes of improving their systems. And that means like when you put in a certain search term and then you scroll like 5 pages down before you find the thing you're looking for, it's like figuring out, oh, like this person meant this, right? But like it includes other information, right? Like you might be putting in like in their automated drafting tools or whatever, like client information that they have some access to. It's just that's not their business. Like they obligate themselves to keep it confidential. Like that all that stuff is important, but it's out there. And that is like largely the same with these legal tech tools, AI tools. And like that's not to say to dismiss it. You should still investigate what claims they make about protecting your data. But a lot of the fear about legal tech tools is really from a misunderstanding of what's going on with their other tech tools.
Alex, you have such a non-traditional relationship with technology than the overwhelming majority of, I think, the way this field has developed, the legal field has developed. And it's interesting, right? Like you've spent a lot of time talking about the efficiencies and the benefits of technology, the data that you track and keep, the ways you're trying to be more efficient, the uncertainty that you dive into with the tech. But, you haven't talked much about like the client benefit there. And I'm so interested because you really are talking about this legal practice in the way that you intend, right? In a very entrepreneurial way. If we go to your website is amazing, by the way. It's a perfect example of your non-traditional way of thinking because I think if someone is shopping for a lawyer, they're used to seeing the books in the background and the like slightly off-center lawyer in a suit, but in a leathery room. And yours looks kind of like a branding and marketing agency. Do you track how like this sort of presentation of yours how the sort of the world receives that and how people like does it affect the way people hunt you down and look for you and secure your services? Are they skeptical?
So first of all, I want to give a shout out to one of our attorneys, Amber Simon. So she is responsible for the bulk of the design. I built it out, but it was her idea to do this design, and kudos to her. But it's been great. So prior to this shift, we had more like it still wasn't traditional, but it was built with the same building blocks other people use. So like WordPress, right? And so it had some of that familiar feel. Um, but along the way, it's been a constant rehoning and refining process to basically turn people away, right? Like we're not trying to say like don't come in the door, but we're trying to say like, hey, like know what you're getting if you come in the door. And we've never seen a downtick in business from one of these changes. In fact, we'll often see an uptick and then it's a better fit. So like we have a really high conversion rate of people who walk through the door. It's like 70% or something like that. Like it's almost an oddity for someone to be like, "Oh, we're not going to hire you." Like at worst it's going to be like, "Hey, we're going to wait a couple of months and then they come back," right? Because the branding it reveals something about us that speaks to something in them, and you know it's a fit before you even get on the phone. Um, so yeah, it's we get comments on it all the time too. Often, like, people will, one of the first things they say is like, "I saw your website and I knew I had to hire you," right? And like, it's not because of anything. They just connect with the idea that it's not some traditional, cookie cutter looking site. It's something that's got personality, and I think they appreciate that.
Is there a piece of advice there, you think? Like, is there I mean, is this just a general human principle? Like, if you authentically present yourself to the world, then everyone knows what they're getting? Or is there a piece of advice there of encouragement, like, for lawyers, especially, if you're just starting your own practice, to market yourself in a way that feels truly authentic to you and not be afraid that you have to position yourself more traditionally?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So when I started, I joined this program called Texas Opportunity and Justice Incubator. And it's this program run by the state bar to help attorneys who want to serve low to middle income Texans um, learn how to run a business, right? Like how to run a practice. And one of the things they talked about that, you try and learn from what they tell you rather than from experience is you can rate your clients A, B, C, D, F, right? And your goal should be to only accept A's and B's. If you accept a C, a D, or an F, you're doing it wrong, because what ends up happening is the clients that you serve, happy with your services, they go and tell their friends, they come in the door to speak with you, and whatever type of client that originating client was is likely to be similar to what that new client's going to be. So building your practice around the people that you enjoy will make you enjoy your practice more, but also it'll more clearly define for you who you're marketing to, right? Like, the patterns will emerge among your clientele where you'll say, "Oh, like, the people in this particular demographic who are doing these things with their lives are the ones that I enjoy working with the most and who seem to come in the door. So I'm going to turn my marketing towards them from me," right? And like, part of keeping that authenticity is because the reason that you enjoy those clients is because of a personality thing, right? Like, it could be any number of reasons, but it's ultimately something that holds true for you. And so, yeah, I think that is a worthwhile thing to pay attention to.
Great point. And I'm curious, this has to stem from a culture perspective in terms of the law firm. And I see your motto, it's creative, passionate lawyering for creative, passionate people, right? And what do you do to make sure you foster a good culture of creativity within your firm?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing experiment, right, to try and make it work. It's a very flat structure, and all of our internal policies are specifically designed to foster this culture. So one example is, there's a financial incentive for attorneys to participate in pro bono. There's a financial incentive for attorneys to take part in leadership, without any sort of dictation on like what that looks like, right? Like, it's just encouraging certain kinds of behaviors. There's a lot of hands-offness to how we operate. Like, we want our people to feel like their job is just a part of their lives, not their entire lives. And so a lot of how we communicate with our candidates is in line with that. Something else that, I'm not an expert in this, but something that I'm like kind of sort of proud of, whether rightfully or not, is when we do a job posting, we always ask for people to submit one resume that's like normal, and then one with any identifiers as to, like, demographics redacted. And they send it into one person, another person reviews, but we find that we get a ton of applications from a very diverse pool of applicants, and that feels good, right? Like, it feels good to know that everyone feels like this is an opportunity for them, which means then that we get to prioritize culture fit when we're going through these applications, right? We have a big enough pool that it can be about, like, hey, we're a team, and we we have a certain philosophy behind us. The other thing is, whenever we make a decision about what the firm's going to do on like a macro scale, we go back to our vision, mission, and values. and we ask ourselves, like, is this something that's in line with the vision, mission, and values? And that is often the determining factor on whether we pursue something or not.
Alex, this is so sort of in line with the way that I think too. I mean, in a way, you, there's a part of what you're saying that is really directly connected to almost hospitality and like what experience are we creating for people? And the only way we can create that experience for people is if we are totally in sync behind the scenes from a foundational level with what we agree that experience should be, whether we know what it should be or whether there's like uncertainty with what we're facing. Um, that also is extremely non-traditional, in my opinion, as it applies to the legal field. And it's also kind of it must be sort of a relief for the people that work with you. Like this is feels different than what I'm used to or what I went to law school and was told was gonna be my job. Is that something like, was there anything deliberate about that for you that was, "I wanna be a little bit counterculture here," or was that something that you just have believed from day one and brought into your practice?
I think like you could ask the administration at UT how they felt about me, and they probably still have some strong feelings, right? Like, so it's like something I identified about myself within the legal community. Like, I'm honestly still a risk averse person, but the crowd that I got along with most during law school were like the MBA students and the public policy students, the people who were like out there taking risks, and I was like the conservative one among all of them. So, like, don't get me wrong, like, I'm still, an attorney at heart, but yeah, like, there was a number of reasons behind it. One, like, it felt true to how I operate, right? Like, I don't show up to my client meetings in a suit unless I absolutely have to for their benefit, right? Like, I don't have an office. Like, I had an office and I was like, "Why am I doing this?" The only people who wanted to meet in my office were the clients that I actually didn't like, and so I was like, "Why do I have an office? Like, this is terrible. It's bringing in clients that don't fit." And, there's nothing wrong with those people, it's just not a good fit. Um, then there's also this recognition that, like, if I'm competing on paper for, like, academic credentials or whatever, there's always gonna be someone better than me, there's gonna be someone who's better funded than me, there's gonna be someone with a bigger network than me. Like, if I try to, like, swim like I'm trying to be a big fish, it's gonna be clear that I'm not. If I swim like I'm, a particular type of fish, like, that could be something that someone is looking for rather than, thinking I'm an apples to apples comparison with some other firm, right? Like, by standing out, I give myself a little bit of an advantage when I'm competing with a larger firm. And we've had that happen as well. Like people who otherwise work with larger firms will come to us and say, like, we don't want that anymore.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us here today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Now, before we wrap up, we always ask this question: what is your hottest take on the legal industry right now?
Okay. I am absolutely sick of people who call them experts and stuff, call themselves experts when they're really not. Uh, the first time I encountered this was blockchain became big in the law, and I remember like trying to learn everything I could about blockchain because like I'm a dabbler in blockchain. I don't know the software behind it or anything. And so there's all these experts out there, and I would like ask them these questions, and, like, they would have the answer, and I was like, "How do these attorneys just know blockchain already?" It's, like, kind of new on the scene, all this stuff, and it always sort of bothered me. I was like, "Why don't I understand, but they understand?" And then, like, with AI, where, like, I was already poised like, I already knew AI from, like, the software side, like, I knew a lot about it, and, like, I would go to these talks to try and, like, find thought leaders on AI in the law and, like, try and understand, like, more and, like, improve my practice, and, like, it became clear, like, oh, 9 times out of 10, they actually aren't experts. They just say they're experts and they're regurgitating some platitude that's not wrong, but it's not actually not actually informed, right? And so right now I've lately been railing kind of against that a little bit, like just why do you need to be the expert, man? If you're not the expert, don't go on the panel. Like I want to hear from people who actually know.
But doesn't AI kind of empower that too, Alex?
It can, but, like, that doesn't mean that you're actually the person to ask a question to, right? Like, so, like, if you're using AI to bolster your research, to, like, put together some package or whatever, I think that's all fine. But like going in and being like, hey, you can ask me any question and I know the answer is the problem. Like, I don't want to spend however much money going to your talk where you just say, well, it depends and you need to research without actually giving me information. Like that's where the problem comes from.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, Alex. Thank you, Joe, for joining us as well. And for everyone in our audience for being here, thank you. And we will catch you on the next one. Up next on Between the Briefs.
Technology is one of the most important things you can leverage. That's what allows you to compete with the larger firms. That allows you to excel and be more productive with your time.
Stay tuned for the full interview coming to you soon.
Between the Briefs is brought to you by Steno. To find out more about Steno and how we combine exceptional court reporting and litigation support services to deliver a superior litigation experience, visit steno.com. That's STENO.com. And then make sure to search for Between the Briefs in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Steno, thanks for listening.